During the days, I felt myself slipping into a kind of madness. Solitary confinement has an astonishing effect on the mind. The trick was to stay calm and keep myself occupied. I spent hours working out how to break free. But trying to escape would have been instant suicide. To hear Shaw, Travels with Myself. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Well House Exorcism. This is your ghost of host of the most, Shanna.
It's PukwuPJ.
And this episode is brought to you by Maggie's Casket LLC. If you are looking for a spooky lady who can teach you to paint, then look no further than this company. Maggie's Casket offers a variety of painting and sipping endeavors. She's a professional and lovely person to work with. So get your spooky on and paint with Maggie's Casket LLC. So, honey, why are we here tonight?
To talk about Alcatraz.
Talk about them criminals.
Yeah.
Yep, them baddies.
The guys who were put there.
Who do the bad juju.
Yes.
That they do. And they swim through. And die, ooh, boo. That's all I got.
Uh-huh.
All right. Anyway.
Sure.
I made
It's time to get you to bed.
It probably is. My references for this evening are similar to last week, alcatrazexperience.com, but I also bop.gov, Britannica, Gray Line of San Francisco, Exemplar, FBI.gov. Oh yeah, I went to the FBI database here. Foundfs.org, Legends of America, and Only in Your State.
And I have a little bit. I wasn't able to do a whole lot of research, but I do have some information, and I got that from
GPT.
No.
What?
How dare you?
What is it?
AlcatrazHistory.com. So
Okay.
what little I do have is from AlcatrazHistory.com.
Wonderful. So if you listened to last week's episode, you got a great introduction to Alcatraz's initial history. With stories of its evil spirits and use as a punishment by the Native Americans, Alcatraz had already started off its existence as a bad rock. However, through the centuries that followed, a fortress and then a jail took shape. It is in this specially designed, inescapable prison where tonight's stories take place.
Ooh.
I know. I'm so proud of my introductions. I gotta say, I work very hard on them. And then it quickly devolves. Around page 3, I'm kind of like, and here's the rest of the information.
And then this happens.
And then. In 1933, the island of Alcatraz was transferred to the U.S. Department of Justice so it could be used by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The federal government created what would become a maximum security, minimum privilege penitentiary to circumvent the rampant crime that was happening in the 1920s and 30s. It is no surprise, then, that the most notorious criminals like Al Capone ended up in this prison. Alcatraz was designed to show to the public what would happen if you decided to break the law. This prison would run for the next 30 years until 1963 as a heavily enforced location until its eventual closure. Now, while many big crime names are connected with Alcatraz, in all actuality, most of the prisoners incarcerated there were not well-known gangsters. Instead, they were prisoners who did one of the following. Either they refused to conform to the rules and regulations at other federal institutions, or they were considered violent and dangerous, or they were considered escape risks. Because of any of these reasons, they could be chosen to be transferred to Alcatraz. But what did that mean?
Can
you believe that it actually officially opened in 1934 once it was transferred over?
Yeah.
So it was 29 years, but I'm rounding up because I am lazy. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the life of prisoners.
Okay.
The everyday existence. We kind of glossed over a little bit last week.
Yeah.
If you were sent to Alcatraz, you knew that you deserved to be there, and you knew that your sentence would be no walk in the park. Daily life within the prison was specifically created with the mindset of breaking prisoners. Each cell contained one bed, a desk, a wash basin, a toilet, and one blanket. All prisoners were awakened daily at 6:25 a.m. Their days were regimented, and after dinner, they were locked back up by 5 p.m. every evening. Many prisoners actually considered the living conditions, for instance, always one man to a cell, at Alcatraz to be better than other federal prisons, and several inmates actually requested a transfer to Alcatraz. However, they were broken later.
Yeah. Probably didn't hear about it.
The rest of it, yeah. The highly structured, monotonous daily routine was designed to teach an inmate to follow rules and regulations. At Alcatraz, a prisoner had 4 rights: food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Everything else was a privilege that had to be earned. Some privileges a prisoner could earn included working, so hooray,
All right.
corresponding with and having visits from family members, access to the prison library, and recreational activities such as painting and music. Once prison officials felt a man no longer posed a threat and could follow the rules, usually after an average of 5 years on Alcatraz, he could then be transferred back to another federal prison to finish his sentence and be released. So a lot of the people I'm going to talk about were at Alcatraz for, like 4.5, 5 years, and then they go back to other prisons.
Okay.
As part of its maximum security efforts, the ratio of guards to prisoners was 1 to 3, compared to other prisons where the ratio averaged 1 to 12. This gave guards a serious advantage with any possible fights, and it also created a constant atmosphere of security and watchfulness. And while I mentioned that visitation could be earned, inmates were allowed no visitors for the first 3 months, and afterward were only allowed 1 visitor per month. While prisoners were allowed limited access to the prison library, no newspapers, unapproved books, or radios were allowed. All incoming and outgoing mail were screened, censored, and retyped. Consideration for work assignments was based on a prisoner's conduct record. This routine was unyielding, day after day, year after year. As quickly as privileges were earned, they could be revoked for the slightest infraction of the rules. And what's crazy is when I was typing this, you work so hard to be able to do the extras, like get to do work.
Yeah.
Or get visitation, but visitation is 1 time per month. Like,
I know.
you work so hard to get that, and then you're like, I guess I'll see my wife, and then that'll be it for the month.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the fact that, like, you'd have to take a ferry or something across the bay to get there.
Yeah, ugh. And the fact that, like, everything is the same every single day, like, again, you beg to go there because you hear some good things, and man, 1 person per cell, but then you realize how terrible it is. And so that's, like, my next section is, it sounds great until it's not.
Yeah.
So the routine was the same every day, with prisoners awakened, given time to tidy their cells and wash up, then marched silently to the mess hall. Following breakfast, the prisoners were then given their work assignments for the day, and after dinner were again locked within their cells. The strict rules required inmates to count every half hour to maintain the routine. Breaking this routine could end in punishment. And I will go over all the different punishments that were enacted in Alcatraz, mostly during the next episode.
Mm.
However, the worst punishment, I would say, wasn't even technically a punishment. It was a strict rule created by Warden Johnston, and he enforced it. A silence policy. Many of the inmates considered this to be their most unbearable punishment. Prisoners were allowed only to talk during meals, in the yard on Saturdays, and for 3 minutes during morning and afternoon work breaks.
I feel like didn't Eastern State have something like that too? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have that in my script. Yeah, I said, now the silence policy was later relaxed, but several reports stated that inmates were driven insane by the severe rule of silence. So even if you were not in solitary confinement, it still felt like you were.
Yeah.
It was the same thing that was seen at Eastern State Penitentiary. And again, we talked about how just that alone drives you insane because you need to have human contact. At least they weren't being kept in their one itty-bitty cell and having everything delivered to them. They could actually walk out to the breakfast area,
Yeah, right.
and then walk to the court. But imagine, like, and that's what makes the escape attempts that we're going to discuss so amazing. Because if you are confined to talking for 3 minutes twice a day and at breakfast and lunch and dinner, like, how much work can you actually get done? Like, how much can you plan? So you can plan a lot, apparently, when you know how to maximize your time.
Yeah.
I guess.
How to say things in as few words as possible, as quickly as possible.
Why say many word, one few word, do, or whatever Kevin says in the office.
Few word work, I think it is.
Few word work, yeah. Oh, boy. Now, there is a fun side fact. Now, I say fun because we like spooky, scary, creepy things. There are many famous stories of people going insane on the island from the rule of silence, and in one movie, Escape from Alcatraz, there is a scene where Roof Percival, a gangster and bank robber, took a hatchet and chopped off his fingers while working because of the quiet. However, this is not true. He actually lost his fingers when a shop door blew shut on his hand. Much less dramatic. So, while the policy of silence was insanity-inducing, no doubt, it did not cause a man to chop off his fingers. Oh, silly Hollywood. Now, as I said, there are many different punishments that we will get into, but most often, the notorious punishment of being tied to a large iron ball with the end of a chain was one of the penalties used. So we say, oh, the old ball and chain.
Yep,
No, that's
good old
literally.
ball and chain.
Although not all prisoners were treated this harshly, those in charge wanted it to be a place people feared, so some extremes were taken. The truth is, much of this was for show. Although some prisoners were treated poorly, some more reliable prisoners were given jobs. Some did housework for families living on the island, and were even caretakers for the youngsters there. Like, can you imagine, oh, you're a prisoner, but you're trustworthy, so here, watch my kids?
I know.
I
I
guess-
would never.
I understand, like, it's rehabilitation, but,
Yeah.
especially when you find out, like, who was coming to this prison, there's no way. Now, the only redeeming qualities, and I put redeeming in air quotes, of the prison were the private cells and the food quality served at the prison. It is nice to have solitary cells and not have to share the space. As mentioned, some criminals begged to go to Alcatraz for this, but the good food was also a reason. These two things had their overall reason for the actual prison. The first was to isolate criminals and hopefully rehabilitate them. So again, having them in their cells by themselves and quiet.
Yeah.
The second, the food, was really good, and that was to prevent riots that were often known to start in other prisons because of the poor quality of the food. So, I guess in this case, good food was necessary to, calm the savage beast. But Alcatraz could boast having decent food for the inmates there.
All right.
So you do get your solitary hotel room, severe hotel room, I guess. You get your nice breakfast, lunch, and dinner,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not allowed to talk to anybody, really. If you're an introvert, I feel like this might be sort of a win.
Deal.
That's what, like, on the outside looking at it, looks fine.
Yeah. Except for the fact that there's like no bed, and it's just cold all the time.
Yeah, only one blanket. You know me, I
Yeah.
can't live with one blanket. So anyway, you also mentioned
Water is scarce. Anyways,
you mentioned on the last episode about like looking out your windows. Life on Alcatraz included the dubious pleasures of watching luxury liners cruise off on relaxing holidays and seeing the lights of the San Francisco skyline twinkling. All while the inmates spent anywhere from 19 to 24 hours a day in their 5 by 9 foot cell.
yeah.
And
That's like the worst punishment right there, for sure.
on some nights, though, inmates could even hear the wealthy partying at the St. Francis Yacht Club across the bay, which was punctuated with the sound of female voices, too. So yeah, if they weren't crazy or jealous or angry, then you're hearing female voices as well. That would definitely drive men mad. So it's no surprise that suicides and murders were a regular occurrence, unfortunately, at Alcatraz.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a place of penitence and rehabilitation, but you also have like the dangling carrot, I guess, the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
And it was designed
It's
that way.
right there.
Although the Alcatraz Penitentiary was able to house 450 convicts, no more than really 250 prisoners ever occupied the island at one time. Escape attempts were rare, but as we mentioned in last week's episode, a few inmates did escape from the island. Whether they survived the currents of the bay is unknown. One daring escape, as I mentioned, was popularized in the film Escape from Alcatraz, which was from 1979. But overall, life within Alcatraz was no trivial matter. Its reputation managed to break the spirits of the most notorious inmates. Legend have it that the empty cells, concealed within the fortress-like walls of Alcatraz, continue to house restless spirits. Among the prisoners who once trod these grim halls were infamous figures like Arthur Doc Barker, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Al Capone, all criminals that we know a lot about and some that we'll delve into tonight. But there were other inmates, less notable of course, that came to the island. In the first group of men brought to the prison, the majority of the men had committed crimes such as robbery, assault, rape, and for the time period, desertion. Because you have all the wars going on. And so, again, you can earn the privilege of taking care of youngsters? No. Some of those...
Deserters, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
The rest of them.
Then transfers began. There were prisoners from the McNeil Island and Atlanta penitentiaries, and then in this group would come the most famous inmate, number 85, who was Al Capone.
Yep.
And that's who I'm going to go into first.
Yep.
So what do you know about Al Capone, honey bunny?
So, yeah, he's the one I was able to, like, get some research in on. Because, you know, you hear the name and everything, but I never really knew much about him. I still don't, because my research got cut off. But, so you'll be educating me in some of it.
I try.
But I do know that he
in
started as, like, a pimp.
Mm-hmm.
And from there became, like, a bouncer of a brothel and did all kinds of little odds and end jobs. Yeah. To the degree where he ended up making, like, $100,000 a week. Back in that time.
Yeah.
You know, which would be an astounding number.
Well, at one point, one part of Chicago becomes his kingdom.
Yeah.
Actually, the research that I had, I used the term fiefdom because that's what the research said.
Yeah, and he's just a political mastermind, or he was. He had got the people loving him, and they called him a modern-day Robin Hood because he opened up soup kitchens and daycares and protected the children, and he took down bootleggers, which is funny because he was a bootlegger himself.
Well, you took care of the other outside business, so everyone had to go to your business. You had to centralize it.
That's
you
right.
Know what I'm saying?
Well, and competition, too. Take them out.
So I'm saying No, it's called centralizing.
Sorry.
He's a political mastermind. He's
Monopolies are illegal.
Exactly.
But
centralizing is not. It's having a corner on the market.
But I do love that, because we said last week that Al Capone called Alcatraz a living nightmare. And I love the story from the warden's memoirs, where he's like, he walked in and I could pick him out of the crowd immediately because he had this stupid smirk on his face. And, you know, he's walking in like he owns the place, because he did in every prison, as we learned from the Eastern State episode that we did.
And I have it in this script tonight, too.
Yeah. And he was very much expecting the same treatment in Alcatraz, which he did not get.
Yeah. Johnston did not care about him.
No.
You're just another number.
Yep.
And so that's actually where my script for him begins, because he is an interesting, like, his story is interesting, you know. And it's amazing how almost all of the criminals that I was looking up, because I chose a couple to kind of parse into here tonight, they all live very short lives. So, Al Capone, and you mentioned the journal entries. Warden Johnston had begun a custom of meeting the new inmates upon their arrival at Alcatraz. When Capone arrived, Johnston immediately recognized him. He was laughing and making comments to the prisoners around him. When Capone's turn came to approach the warden, he attempted to flaunt the power he had had in Atlanta. See, while in Atlanta, Al Capone had been successful in bribing the guards for additional favors, such as unlimited visiting privileges, liquor, and uncensored reading materials.
Also, don't forget just a carpet.
Well, that was Eastern
radios.
Yeah. In fact, he was so successful in gaining special privileges that family members had taken up residence at a nearby hotel, and it was through these family members that he continued to run his mob in Chicago. So, Al Capone came to Alcatraz with the plan in mind that he would continue to be a top dog.
Al Capone went to Alcatraz.
Oh my. However, Johnston was not interested and immediately assigned Al Capone his prison number and ordered him back in the line with the others. And so began his stint at Alcatraz.
That's like us as teachers when, like, that one kid walks into the room and it's like, yeah, shut up, sit down.
Yeah, I don't care. Or when they're like, oh, you had my sister. Yeah, she was my favorite of your family. And you just keep teaching. You have the deadpan face and they're just like, oh my gosh. Anyway, Al Capone was an extremely famous criminal. Born in January of 1899 in New York, he was at the end of 6th grade when he chose to drop out of school and join the local street gang, which you mentioned. He starts off in the lower rungs. This gang included Johnny Torrio and Lucky Luciano. It was through Johnny Torrio that Al Capone would end up in Chicago. In about 1920, the two moved to Chicago to illegally brew, distill, and distribute beer and liquor. It was 1920, Prohibition. Mm-hmm. However, this mob also cultivated legitimate businesses, as you mentioned, in cleaning and dyeing. So we got the fabric business going on.
Yep.
And they created positive public connections, as you mentioned, so soup kitchens and daycares. And they also had connections with public officials, labor unions, and employee associations. So they became, on one side, great people and spokespersons for the public. On the other side, the people who were distributing all the booze and the mob violence. Torrio was in charge until 1925 when he surrendered control to Al Capone and he moved back to Brooklyn. There had been an assassination attempt on him and he was terribly wounded. So he's like, yeah, I'm out, bye. And he's like, you're in charge, Al. So with Al Capone in charge, his mob was built into a strong, fearsome, ruthless gang of Chicago, the one that we all know and hear about and know about these days. All of his rivals were eliminated slowly, so he took care of it. So he centralized.
Yeah.
He got that corner spot in the market. And then Cicero became the playground for the Al Capone mob. And so I always like to say, too, like, it really became not just his playground, but it became his fiefdom. It was his kingdom. And you knew that he was the owner. Like, he owned Chicago. But then the St. Valentine's Day Massacre happens. And you know more about that than I do, right?
No.
Okay, well, I got some stuff here for you. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre happened on, no surprise, February 14th.
What?
I know. 1929.
I feel like the day's important.
And it was one... I just give up. And it's one of the events that would seal Al Capone in the annals of criminal history. On this day, 7 members or associates, we'll use that word, of the Bugs Morin mob were machine gunned down against a garage wall by rivals posing as police.
Oh, that's right. I do remember this story.
So they pretended and just gunned them down. It was a massacre. The massacre was generally ascribed to the Capone mob, but at the time, Al himself was in Florida because he owned a home there.
Yeah.
So he may have said, do it. And that's why he's the mastermind behind it.
Yeah.
But he wasn't there when it happened, so you couldn't pin on it on.
Yeah. I didn't do nothing.
I wasn't even there.
He's Southern?
Yeah, well, he was in Florida. I don't know. Oh, sorry. He's got to have that accent. See? I wasn't there, you see?
Yeah, I wasn't there. I saw nothing.
I didn't see nothing. You gotta use a double negative.
I got a cigar sticking out of my mouth, you see?
Oh.
This big lips. He got some massive lips.
He was good looking, I think, right? I don't know.
You see pictures of him?
I know. But I gotta say, like, the cameras of that time period really captured their eyes in a way that ours cannot these days, especially if they have blue eyes. Look at how bright his eyes are there.
Like, to quote Watchmen, people of a certain era have a look, you know? And, like, he looks like a 1930s, like, burly man, you know? Like, you can immediately pick what era he lived in.
And you can see, too, like, the escapees for the escape we're going to discuss tonight, their images, too. Their eyes are so blue, and they just pop off and they look just like him.
Yeah.
You know, same with Machine Gun Kelly. Anyway,
yeah.
While Capone may have been a bit miffed by Johnston's snub, it was no secret that Capone's arrival at Alcatraz generated more newspaper headlines than the opening of the prison itself. And in truth, his arrival would begin an era of public fascination with the maximum security prison. During Capone's sentence at Alcatraz, he made several other attempts to con Johnston into allowing him special privileges, but all would be denied. In this way, Warden Johnston stands out as a decent guy who understood the need for rules and regulations if rehabilitation was to be achieved. In all, Capone spent 4.5 years at Alcatraz, and in that time he held various menial jobs at the prison. Also, while he was there, he spent 8 days in isolation due to a fight with another inmate, and was stabbed with a pair of scissors by another prisoner.
Ow.
Yeah, oopsies. Of course, it is now widely known that Al Capone had syphilis, and it was during his stint at Alcatraz that he began to suffer the symptoms of it. Because of this, he actually spent more time in the hospital wing than he did in his own cell. Finally, in 1938, he was transferred to Terminal Island Prison in Southern California. Suffering from paresis...
It's a terrible name for a prison.
Terminal Island? And he's going there with a terminal illness.
I know.
Oh, ba-doom-ching.
Like, this is the hospice island.
No, I can't feel sorry for Al Capone. Sorry, it's not
I'm
going to
getting
happen.
out early, right? You sure are, buddy. You sure are.
Oh, stop it. Suffering from paresis derived from syphilis, He had deteriorated greatly during his confinement. The paresis from syphilis causes inflammation in the brain, which leads to dementia and partial paralysis of your body parts. So it's not just paresis, it's in the brain, so it causes different, neurological issues.
Yeah, different parts of your body start shutting down.
Yeah. But the biggest thing is all that inflammation in your brain, which leads to dementia and loss of education and learning.
Yeah.
Immediately on release, he entered a Baltimore hospital for brain treatment and then went to his Florida home, an estate on Palm Island in Biscayne Bay near Miami. He never publicly returned to Chicago. He had become mentally incapable of conducting any mob violence. In 1946, his physician and a Baltimore psychiatrist, after examination, both concluded Capone then had the mentality of a 12-year-old child. Capone resided on Palm Island with his wife.
He laughed at the dumbest jokes. People say they have to go do their duty, and he just giggled.
Capone resided on Palm Island with his wife and immediate family in a secluded atmosphere until his death due to a stroke and pneumonia on January 25th, 1947. This was less than 10 years later. He was 48 when he died. So yeah, he leaves in 1938. Less than 10 years later, he has passed away from syphilis.
48. Yikes.
And again, I can't get over how young these men were, and it's probably because of the lives they lived, You can't expect to live very long.
Syphilis will do that too.
Well, that, yeah. But like George Machine Gun Kelly, like he doesn't live long in the world either, like in comparison to Al Capone.
Yeah.
And that's the next person I'm going to talk about.
Oh boy.
So George Machine Gun Kelly. He was another famous criminal who resided at Alcatraz. His real name was George Kelly Barnes. Obviously, George Machine Gun Kelly has a better ring to it.
Yeah, right.
An active criminal, he was originally involved in bootlegging. No surprise, just like Al Capone. Because of this, he was sentenced to Leavenworth, where he spent 3 years. He then resumed a life of crime, but this time moved on to robbing banks. He soon advanced to kidnapping, and in 1933, he held for ransom a wealthy Oklahoma oil magnate. According to the story, at 11:15 p.m. on Saturday, July 22nd, 1933, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Urschel were playing bridge with their friends, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Jarrett, and they were at the Urschel residence in Oklahoma City. Suddenly, 2 men, one armed with a machine gun, for his moniker, and the other with a pistol, opened the screen door and inquired which of the 2 men was Mr. Urschel. Receiving no reply, they remarked, "Well, we'll have to take both of them." After warning the women against calling for help, they marched Urschel and Jarrett to a Chevrolet sedan and drove rapidly away. It would be this week-long abduction that would eventually end in Kelly's capture, but also his nickname Machine Gun. After he was captured, he was given a life sentence and sent to Leavenworth. Again. But within months, he was transferred to Alcatraz. Apparently, while there, he was a model prisoner. I guess he enjoyed being in Alcatraz.
He vogued a lot.
On the catwalk?
Yep, strutted to his cell.
He spent 17 years there. He suffered a minor heart attack and was sent back to Leavenworth in 1951. And in 1954, he was paroled. But within months, he suffered another heart attack and died at the age of 59. And if you read the whole story about the abduction of Mr. Urschel, it was to make money. It was the idea of, getting a ransom.
Mm-hmm.
They take both men in their car. They have them blindfolded. By the time they get to this rickety bridge, they realize which one's Urschel, which one's Jarrett. So they kick Jarrett out on the road and they say, "Good luck, bye. Don't tell him which way we're going." And so Jarrett has to walk back home. And he says they were going south. He tells, "I'll tell you which way they were going." But during that time, while Urschel is in the car, they stop off. And he is, at that point, blindfolded, so he can't see anything. But he can tell they've stopped off at a garage because he can hear them changing license. They're talking, changing license plate numbers. They get into a different car. And then they head off again. They get to one location. They get to a second location. While he's there, they make him lay on a blanket. And they actually put coffin and tape his ears closed, too, so that the sounds are muffled.
Yeah.
And then he is there literally for a week. And he has 2 men who are watching him. And the 2 guys are like, "Oh, yeah, we're well-known, robbers and blah, blah, blah. We're into all this stuff, too." And it was only because eventually Urschel's allowed to go free. They give him $10 and say, "Go home." After all that time.
Well, it was fun. We're done with you now. Here, get a cab.
Well, if you read the whole thing, like, they had this really long and convoluted plan to get money, so they had to, like, run an ad in the newspaper for, like, a whole week. It was the whole
Oh my
ad
gosh,
story.
yeah.
So if you've heard of the famous Machine Gun Kelly, like, stint, it's the whole newspaper thing.
The only thing I really know about him is how he got the nickname. It's because of his wife.
Well, and that's so. What happens then is with this is Urshel is saying, like, well, I'm pretty sure they're talking about this person, whatnot, and so by August they had rounded up everyone involved because the FBI got involved, and they're able to kind of deduce like who was he talking about, who are the two people, and then they realized, you know, he has a wife. Different, obviously he goes by Barnes, but like his real he uses the last name Kelly instead of Barnes, and so they're able to get her too.
Yeah,
but his famous machine gun.
She bought for him.
Mm-hmm. But that's the machine gun that he abducted somebody. How romantic.
And he was, quote, an expert machine gunner.
Aww. George Barnes. What a good guy. No, not really.
Yeah, they say that. She egged him on, like, a lot to climb the leaderboard and be public enemy number 1.
Well, listen, Al Capone did it. So, I mean, and Al Capone's family lived in Florida, and they were living, I mean, you're making $100,000 a week, or, you know, like, I'm telling you what.
That was in the 30s.
Yeah. You could be living in Florida. You could retire. All right, our final person for this evening that I want to discuss before I get into the escapes is the Birdman of Alcatraz.
Ah, yes.
Ah, yes. He sounds so quaint. His name was Robert Stroud, and he was known as the Birdman of Alcatraz. He received very little notoriety until he gained attention in the 1962 movie entitled The Birdman of Alcatraz. The movie,
I wonder what it's about.
Well, it was not completely accurate because the actor and the portrayal of the character are very different.
Yeah.
So the movie definitely changed things again. Oh, silly Hollywood. Now, the truth is, Stroud was convicted of manslaughter in 1909 and was initially sent to McNeil Island to serve a 12-year sentence. But what started out as a manslaughter sentence quickly turned into murder. While at McNeil Island, he was difficult to manage and attacked an orderly. Because of this, he was sent to Leavenworth. After less than 4 years, he killed a guard there and was later sentenced to hang. After his mother appealed to President Wilson, the sentence was commuted to life in prison. Because of his incredibly violent nature, he was generally in segregation for all of his stints in jail. So he sounds so quaint and cute, and the movie makes him out to be some, you know, kind of, I don't know how you want to describe it, like, you know, almost like a grandfatherly type. No.
Yeah, kind of like Brooks in Shawshank.
Yeah. This guy, no. You don't want to be near him.
Yeah. Well, all the pictures I've ever seen of him were like at the end of his time, where he's that he's that goofy looking old man.
He still looks like a Nazi, like, you know, doctor.
Yeah,
he looks like Mengele.
Does, yeah. But like when he was first arrested, those early pictures of him, he is a big guy.
And he still looks creepy.
Well, he's always creepy looking, yeah, but
I could see him wearing Nazi paraphernalia or regalia and doing some experiments like that. His picture creeps me out.
Yeah.
Now, his odd nickname came because of his stint in jail. During Stroud's 30 years as a prisoner at Leavenworth, he began to study birds, which gained him international attention. He even wrote 2 books about canaries and their diseases. Initially, prison officials allowed Stroud's bird studies because it was seen as a constructive use of his time, and it quelled his violent behavior. So it's like, yeah, you can play with your birds.
It shuts him up. Just let it go.
Give him his canary. However, contraband items were often found hidden in the bird cages, and prison officials discovered that equipment Stroud had requested for his, quote, scientific studies had actually been used to construct a still for a home brew in a cell. So,
priorities.
Would you like toilet booze? Because I got toilet gin for you. But it was pretty smart on his part, I'm not going to lie.
Is it made in the tank or the bowl?
Do they have tanks in their rooms?
I don't think so.
Oh, boy. When Stroud began to openly violate prison rules to continue his birding experiment and communications with bird breeders, he was sent to Alcatraz in 1942, where he never again was permitted to continue his avian studies. Poor guy. He spent the next 17 years at Alcatraz. He spent 6 years in segregation in D Block, which I'll discuss on next episode, because that's one of the most haunted areas, and 11 years in the prison hospital. This was once again to simply segregate him from the general population.
So no one gets hurt.
He was not hurt. He was just there to keep people from getting hurt.
Yep.
But then he genuinely became sick. And because of this, he was transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri in 1959. He died there 4 years later in November in 1963. So, but yeah, I gotta say, pretty smart guy. You know, he uses his bird cages to smuggle.
He liked his birds.
He also liked his booze.
He liked his booze.
And he liked to be alone.
You know.
But there are stories about him, you know, haunting the location too. So again, we'll get into Cell Block D next episode. But now I want to use the rest of our remaining time tonight to discuss some, well, in this case, just one of the famous escapes.
Yes.
There are a whole bunch.
Yes.
And we'll go over more, of course, next week. We'll do the escapes and we'll do the hauntings.
Mm-hmm.
But let's move into the beginnings of escapes.
Yes.
Though the prison was heavily fortified, and it was assumed that the treacherous waters of the San Francisco Bay would prevent any escape, several attempts were made throughout the years. Over the 30 years that the federal prison operated, 36 men, including 2 who had tried to escape twice, were involved in 14 separate escape attempts.
Yeah, I love the one guy who made it to, like, the Golden Gate Bridge and just passed out
From
at the foundation of the bridge. Yeah, from hypothermia and just exhaustion. They grabbed him and dragged him back to prison.
That's next week's episode. There goes the whole story.
Well,
and actually...
Well, everyone, we're not doing Alcatraz next week. Sorry.
No spooky stuff. Fun side note, though. When I was doing my research, they said there are no man-eating sharks in the waters. It's only bottom-feeding sharks.
Well, yeah, that's outdated research.
I know.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I was
like it's been a myth for years, decades.
And it's like, well, actually, my husband did some research, and it wasn't from ChatGPT.
Yeah. It was, I think, 2015 when they first got... It was video footage of, like, I think it was someone on a cruise ship. Maybe it was a fishing boat. But, like, you see a great white just leap out of the air and, like, grab a seal. and then, like, you know, go back under. And there it is. Proof that great whites are in San Francisco Bay.
Don't go swimming, guys. Okay, bye. All right, anyway. Of the 36 men, 23 were caught, 6 were shot and killed during their escape, and 2 drowned. Also, 2 men who were caught were later executed in the gas chamber at the California State Prison at San Quentin for their role in the death of a correctional officer during the famous May 2nd through 4th, 1946 Battle of Alcatraz, which I will talk about on next episode, because that needs a good portion.
Yeah.
Because it was over a couple days and they had to call in the guard, you know, so. Now, whether or not anyone succeeded in escaping from Alcatraz depends on the definition of, quote, successful escapes. Officially, no one ever succeeded in escaping from Alcatraz, although to this day there are 5 prisoners listed as missing and presumed drowned.
Yeah.
3 of whom we'll discuss tonight. And yeah, 2 that escaped. 1 drowned on the way and 1 got to the, you know, the bay and then hypothermia. So, but I want to discuss the most crazy escape attempt. And for, like, once in a while, I go out of timeline order, and it feels awkward. This one definitely is out of timeline order, but since we talked about this one already loosely last episode, I thought we would begin our escape section with this one. The Alcatraz escape of June 1962.
These guys are, like... they're kind of my heroes.
Like, when I go over this... It's just, I can't, like, and again, if you're not allowed to talk, like, how they plan this, I mean, I just want to go, like,
yeah.
So, it all happened on the night of June 11th, 1962. After 6 months of meticulous preparation, 3 inmates managed to successfully break out, though to this day it is uncertain if they ever actually reached the mainland. And, actually, this escape is thought by some to have factored into the decision to close Alcatraz prison less than a year later. Now, on to the story. A guard making a routine cell block head count on the early morning of June 12, 1962, came upon 3 inmates apparently still sleeping in their cells.
Already.
Further investigation revealed that the inmates were in fact dummy heads made from painted paper mache with their hair glued on, and that, like, to me, this is amazing. They cut off hair for this. And that the actual occupants of the cells, the convicted armed robber Frank Morris and the convicted bank robbing brothers Clarence and John Anglin, were nowhere to be found. The guard raised the alarm, and the warden in charge promptly notified state and federal authorities, as well as the U.S. military. An intensive manhunt began. At this point, the men had been missing for hours, a whole night. Because remember, they go to bed at 5 o'clock in the evening, and then they're there for 13 hours, 6:25, 6:30.
Now, you might answer this, but I want to know, in this National Geographic documentary I was watching, this guy takes us through, like, the path they took, and he's like, right here, this spot, this is where they got off the island. I'm like, how do you know this?
Actually, I will explain, yeah. So, yeah. In the cells of the missing men, guards discovered that grill openings in the concrete back walls, which were 8 inches thick, had been very slowly and laboriously enlarged with tools fashioned from spoons stolen from the mess hall. So they were digging for months with spoons. Okay?
And drills made of vacuum motors. One of them had fashioned a drill out of a vacuum cleaner motor.
Now check this out, though. Fake grills, also made from paper mache,
Yep.
which was paper taken from magazines in the prison library, had been used to hide the areas of excavation while work was still in progress. So you know how, like, in Shawshank, you have him hiding the hole behind his poster?
Yeah.
They made paper mache grills that looked just like the freaking wall.
They got an A+ in arts and crafts.
They did. All
well,
right.
the one guy used a bit of concrete from the wall and painted his face on it. He didn't paper mache. He's like, no, I'm just going to use this rock. He'll be fine.
Authorities traced the path of Morris and the Anglin brothers through a utility corridor and up the back wall of the cell block, using plumbing pipes as steps. Again, ingenuity.
I know.
To the cell block roof. From there, the three lifted themselves up through a large ventilation shaft and reached the roof of the building.
Don't forget they handcrafted flashlights, too. How? I wouldn't even know how to make one. Like, and I have stores where I can buy parts.
They next used a large exterior pipe to slip 50 feet to the ground. Then the men cut through the barbed wire at the top of the perimeter fencing and scrambled down a steep embankment to the water's edge. Their subsequent movements, then, are unclear. Prisoners with a history of successful or attempted escapes elsewhere were often sent to Alcatraz because it was nigh impossible to escape from. All 3 of these escapees fit into the category of escape artists, literally, and Morris, the ringleader, was also highly intelligent. If you put 3 incredibly successful escape artists together, you get a story such as this one. Morris's plan made allowances for the difficulty of swimming to shore in the cold water and the strong current of the bay. It was his idea to build an inflatable raft by gluing together rubber raincoats.
50 rubber raincoats.
That had been stolen.
With glue. Where'd they get the glue? Where'd they get 50 raincoats?
How do you not notice that missing? It was his, I can't even read this now. It was his idea to build an inflatable raft by gluing together rubber raincoats that had been stolen from the prison shop where they were manufactured. Now you mentioned, how do we know where they left? We actually only know all this detail because many of these details about the escape, the whole plot, were supplied by Alan West. He was an inmate who was an active participant. He was the 4th. But he had failed to get out of his cell in time to join the others. Actually, according to one source, he couldn't fit through the cell tunnel he had made because he was a little chunky, and therefore he had to stay behind.
Oh, dang it.
So, he was...
This chef is just too dang good in this prison.
For 6 months they are plotting, and his only problem is he's just too big for the hole.
It all leads down to that one night, and you screw it up.
And he actually factors really big into all of this. He helped them...
Factor's really big.
I walked into that one.
You did.
West...
He didn't.
He
got stuck.
West helped build both the raft and rubber life jackets using the makeshift workshop on the cell block roof. See, he had access to it because, due to earning the privilege of jobs, he had been assigned to paint the roof by guards who did not monitor him. So imagine Shawshank Redemption painting the roof, but now you have a place where you can build rafts and no one's going to look at it.
Yeah.
the plotters used the same roof to store other equipment, such as their makeshift drill that they used to remove the cover from the ventilation shaft. Yep, so thanks to West, they had all the locations, all the materials needed, and they had a very, very intelligent criminal and escape artist mastermind. So it is fairly certain that Morris and the Anglins escaped from Alcatraz, but it's not known whether they successfully escaped to the mainland. Fragments of their rubber equipment were found on or near Angel Island, a former immigration station that was their intended intermediate destination. From Angel Island, the men had intended to swim to the Marin County mainland, according to West, and then steal new clothes from a retail store. Again, they're getting all of this from West afterward. He's like, here's the plot. Because it was, I think he wanted to be a part of it. He's like, look how cool it was. They did it. They made it.
Mr. West, why is there a hole in your wall? Are you stuck? Do you need help?
Let me grab you by the feet and pull you out.
Why is my face red?
However, when it comes to stealing new clothes, no such crime was ever reported. So that is one of the reasons why the FBI believes that they did not make it. Now, here I have to be like the mediator. It could be that they decided to steal clothes from a consignment location or a location where maybe clothes were donated.
Or hanging on the line even in someone's backyard.
I think that would have gone noticed, though.
Probably.
Whereas, like, if you're dumpster diving, if there are, like, bags of clothes outside a consignment shop, no one's going to notice, right? So, a lack of stolen articles could not dissuade me from the possibility that they did actually successfully escape. But some speculated that the men had died before reaching shore. Although no bodies were found in the bay, they could easily have been swept out to sea by the current. In the ensuing years, there were supposedly several sightings of the escapees and messages from them. Reports of their survival were offered to the media by family members and former associates. So I'm just saying, people who would know them and have access. However, the FBI did not really believe any of these reports. They remained skeptical, and they closed the case officially in 1979. They officially concluded that the three had drowned in the bay. So my question is, what is your opinion?
I don't know. I feel like they made it. There's like this gut feeling that tells me they got out.
These scrappers. Honestly, at that point, I kind of want to say, like, you win. It's like when you're in a classroom and you're talking to a student and they're saying things and you're like, your little stinker. And then you're like, you know what? No, you're right. You win. I'm going to drop it. I agree with you. We're at that point. And you can't tell me, like, if they
I could see, like, the government being like, well, no, we haven't found any evidence that they died, or that they're alive out there, but they just don't want to admit that people escaped.
Well, and you found remnants of their life rafts and stuff they made out of the rubber raincoats, but you don't find their bodies. And you're saying they can be swept out to sea, but the remnants of the boat did not. Like, that to me kind of is a little fishy. Fishy. Now, could they have been eaten by the sharks and the boat left? Sure. We'll go with that. But wouldn't you have, like, some clothes at least? I don't know.
And I can't imagine all three of them would have been eaten. You know? Shark would take one person.
And 3 people on one boat, you can huddle for warmth so that the possibility of hypothermia drops. And if you're all rowing, you're not going to get exhausted.
Yeah, especially for a short trip like that. It's only, 3 miles?
It's not too bad.
It's not that... In a boat, that's nothing. Like, that's not bad.
Swimming is one thing.
Yeah. Because you're not going to get hypothermia in a boat. You're not getting wet. Except for the odd splash.
Yeah. Or just the chill in the air and the fog, which will dampen your skin eventually, and the sea spray.
Eventually.
But yeah, it's not too bad.
Yeah.
I feel, and again, if their family and their former associates, especially their old business partners, would have no need to say, oh yeah, I saw Johnny down the road. They're not going to be like, oh yeah, I talked to Morris and he sold me whatever. Or, they're not going to do that. They have no interest because they want to be the top dog. They want to be, enemy number one.
Exactly.
So I think that they actually made it.
I do too.
I imagine that's kind of like Shawshank Redemption where, they get out. It's a successful ploy.
They meet up in San Juantaneo.
Yeah. They're down in Mexico fixing a boat. That's what's happening there. So I don't know. Our listeners can tell us their opinions, but
Morgan Freeman's there.
Wouldn't that be great? Every story
you escape from prison, there's Morgan Freeman.
That should be the win for you. Because, he's God. And, like, he played God. You got to be able to see Morgan Freeman. They call me Red.
Why is that? Maybe it's because I'm Irish.
I love it. Oh, but anyway, so there are lots of other escapes, which again, we're going to go over next week. So, and it is with this story that we will end part 2 of Alcatraz. So thank you, PJ, for your help in the escape attempt.
My deep, personalized insights into the matter. I know.
You just bring something. I just...
Charisma.
Sure.
Chutzpah.
Chutzpah, yeah, there's the word I like to use. Oh boy. Next week will be our last part. We will discuss a few more escape attempts, including the one where the guy dies of hypothermia. Well, has hypothermia and collapses.
Yep.
We will discuss in detail the bloody fight that they called the Battle of Alcatraz that happened in May of 1946. We'll discuss the terrors of solitary confinement, which I have been keeping in my back pocket.
Yeah.
Because
solitaries.
We discussed the Klondike over at Eastern State.
Yes.
But solitary confinement here at Alcatraz was a different different animal.
Yeah. A whole nother animal.
A whole other animal. And no, you won't get that, listeners, but I do. And all the spooky stories that I have, there are so many.
Yeah, I've been collecting quite a bit of those. Yeah. And there's one ghost hunting tool that I just hate that we'll talk about too.
So we'll have like PJ's pet peeves?
Yeah, probably.
Oh, another alliteration. I love it.
Should I make a theme song for it?
No! So listen in next week for the conclusion of this 3-part series. Thank you all for listening to the Well House Exorcism. You can find us on Instagram as Well House Exorcism. Find us on Twitter/X as wellhouse_exorc. Or Facebook under Games Overboard because we are a subsidiary. Feel free to hop on our website as well, gamesoverboard.com. Please email us. We want to hear from you. And as always, think spooky thoughts. Jails and prisons are designed to break human beings, to convert the population into specimens in a zoo, obedient to our keepers, but dangerous to each other. Angela Davis.